Hi everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to my channel. We can't have an orc army without some bosses, and this time I'm going to avoid using contrast paints for the base coats. I'm challenging myself to see if I can replicate the color scheme from my previous videos using a more traditional base, shade, and highlight approach instead of contrast. We also have a set of recipe cards to go along with the video, and you can download them and print them out. Details about how to get them will be down in the description below. The first half of the video will be beginner friendly, and will cover the basics and paint the models to a battle-ready quality. In the second half, we'll spend a little more time and add some highlights. So let's grab our brushes and get started. After assembling the models, I undercoated them with black primer and attached them to corks for easier handling. Then I used my airbrush to spray white paint in a Zenithal style, mostly so it will be easier to see on the camera. Since we're not using contrast paints for these, the Zenithal base coat isn't really necessary, and you could use any color primer you like. First, let's start off with the skin, and I base coated it with Ork flesh. After the first layer dried, I painted a second for an opaque finish. Next I shaded the skin all over with croak green. If you want darker shadows, you could apply a second layer after the first one dries. If you want to see how to paint a variety of orc skin tones, check out this video here. I base coated some of the leather and cloth with Xandri dust. I'm going to paint a bunch of different base coats next, and then shade them all at once. I want an opaque finish for each of these colors, so after the first layer dried, I added a second. Next I painted the trousers with storm vermin fur. I painted some of the pouches and straps with Mournfang brown. I want this shirt to be a dark red leather color, so I base coated it with Doombull brown. I painted some of the belts and straps with Dryad bark. I base coated the boots and remaining leather straps with black paint. I painted the fuel can with Castellan green. Next I painted the mouth on the Warboss with corn red. I painted the teeth red as well. It'll be quicker and easier to paint them later, and that way I can also leave a little bit of red along the base of each tooth for the gums. I painted all the metal areas next with Iron Hand steel, and after the first layer dried, I painted a second for a bright, opaque finish. An easy way to make different kinds of metal is to start with a silver base, and then add layers of transparent colors on top. For a bright yellow brass color, I painted a layer of Agaros dunes on the weapon barrels, ammunition, and a few random details. For extra variety, I decided to add a dark bronze as well, with a layer of Gore-Grunta fur. I painted a layer of black Templar on some areas next. This will make a really dark, almost black metal. You can dilute the black Templar with contrast medium if you want more of the silver to show through. Next, I painted the horns, skulls, nails, and teeth with bone white, and after the first layer dried, I painted a second. Next, I shaded everything except for the skin with a custom mix I like to call Armor Wash, and you can learn how to mix your own in this video here. This is a mix of equal parts Rattling Grime, Contrast Medium, and Lamian Medium. It makes a warm black shade, not as warm as Agrax Earthshade, but with more warmth than Nuln Oil. If you don't feel like mixing anything, you could use Agrax Earthshade or Nuln Oil instead. We can't have bad moons without yellow, so I painted the remaining armor panels and banner with Averland Sunset. After the first layer dried, I painted a second. Depending on how thin your layers are, you may need a third or even a fourth layer for an opaque finish. These orcs are really wealthy, and they have enough money for 2 shades of yellow paint, so I painted over a few of the armor pieces with moon yellow. For a really smooth base coat, I diluted the yellow with water and built up a few thin layers. I also painted a checkerboard on the shoulder pad. Start off by drawing a grid with narrow lines. I'm not too worried about these being perfect squares. I don't think the orcs are very good at drawing straight lines anyway. Once I sketched out the grid, I filled in every other square with lighter yellow. With all the yellow base coated, next I applied a generous layer of Cassandora Yellow Shade. Red will contrast well with these orcs, so I decided to base coat the Space Marine parts with Mephiston Red. Next I used a sharp brush to apply Karaberg Crimson Shade directly in the recesses. I think this is a baby squig, but I'm not too sure. Whatever it is, I decided to paint it with Jokero Orange. Then I shaded it all over with Fuegan Orange shade paint. Is it pronounced Fuegan or Fugan? Drop a comment below and let me know. I painted the ammo belts and any remaining wires with black. I also used a sharp brush to add a narrow black line anywhere the model could use extra definition. At this stage you could base the models and call them finished, but I'd like to add some highlights and extra details, so let's keep going. I highlighted the skin first with a glaze of Ork flesh. Dilute the paint with water, and with barely any paint on the brush, apply a thin layer over the raised edges. A glaze should be semi-transparent, and it allows some of the base layers to show through. By building up a few layers, you can make a softer, blended effect, and it looks much smoother than highlighting with undiluted paint. The paint should dry almost as soon as it comes off the brush. If it runs or flows off the brush, it means your brush is overloaded. Next I highlighted some of the edges with a mix of Ork flesh and moon yellow. This is about 4 parts Ork flesh and 1 part yellow. I picked out most of the upward facing edges and any sharp details. I decided to highlight the skin one more time with a mix of about equal parts Ork flesh and moon yellow. You could apply this layer as a glaze if you want a more blended result. Now is a great time for me to ask you for a helping hand. I would like to make content creation my full-time job, and I can't do that without your help. If you enjoy the channel, please give the video a like, a hype if you can, and share it with someone who may enjoy it as well. You may have also noticed that I don't have brand advertisements or sponsors in my videos. This channel is possible because of the generous support of our channel members. If you'd like to support the channel in that way, please consider Patreon or a YouTube channel membership. We have some perks including a Discord server, printer-friendly PDF files of our new recipe cards, and early access to videos. Next I added some color to the lower lip and around any cuts with a couple glazes of Cadian flesh tone, diluted with water. Then I added a small amount of Magos purple. I highlighted the edges of the darker yellow armor next with a very sharp line of moon yellow. I focused mostly on the edges, but I did add a couple scratches here and there. I want the fabric banner to look softer than the armor, so I mixed a more subtle mid-tone to highlight it. This is a mix of about equal parts moon yellow and Averland sunset. You could dilute the paint with water and apply a few glaze layers instead if you want a blended look. Next I highlighted the bright yellow with a sharp line of toxic yellow. I highlighted the dark red leather next with a glaze of Doombull brown. Dilute the paint with water, and with barely any paint on the brush, focus on the flat and upward facing areas, while avoiding the recesses. Next I added a sharp highlight on the edges with Tuskgore fur. Moving on to the medium brown leather next, I added a glaze highlight of Mournfang brown. Again, I focused on the flat and upward facing areas and avoided the recesses. I highlighted the edges next with a sharp line of rat skin flesh. I highlighted the tan leather next with a glaze of Xandri dust. Next, I highlighted the edges with Flayed One Flesh. In the last couple videos, I used a mix of bone white and Xandri dust, and I was looking for a different highlight color so I don't have to mix anything. Flayed One Flesh ended up being a good substitute. I highlighted the dark brown leather with a glaze of Dryad bark. Next, I painted an edge highlight with Steel Legion Drab. This is a fairly big jump up in value from the base color, and the highlights can look too drastic if they aren't sharp enough, so you may want to highlight with a darker color first. I would recommend using either Blood Reaver Flesh or a mix of equal parts Dryad Bark and Steel Legion Drab. I highlighted the gray trousers next with a couple glazes of Storm Vermin Fur. Next, I highlighted the edges with a mix of about 3 parts Storm Vermin Fur and 1 part Bone White. If you don't feel like mixing anything, you could use Administratum Gray instead. I highlighted the black areas next with a mix of about equal parts black and Storm Vermin Fur. I focused mostly on the edges, but added a slight glaze on some of the flat sections too. Next, I highlighted the edges with a sharp line of Storm Vermin Fur. In the previous videos, I base coated the black areas with Black Templar contrast paint, and since that provides some natural highlights, I was able to skip the midtone highlight and jump straight to Storm Vermin Fur. Next, I painted the eyes with a dot of Wild Rider Red, leaving a narrow black outline. I also highlighted the edges of the Blood Angel's armor. I highlighted the eyes and edges of the armor next with Fire Dragon, and I also added a few highlights on the squig. Next, I highlighted the teeth, stitches, skulls, and horns with Bone White. Depending on how dark the shade dried, you may want to highlight the horns with Xandri dust first. Bone White might be a little too light in value. I diluted my paint with plenty of water and built up a few sharp glaze-style highlights on the horns. I highlighted the teeth and skulls with white, and I also painted the eye lens. Next I added a layer of Cassandora yellow on the eye lens. And after that dried, I touched up the edge details with black paint. Before I highlight the metals, I'd like to add some weathering. I added rust to the steel with Mournfang Brown, diluted with plenty of water. You could apply as much or as little as you want. I really like the way it looks on the blackened steel, so I decided to add some more. I added a heat staining effect on the brass parts of the weapon barrels with Magos Purple, painted about halfway up the barrel, followed by some Tyran Blue shade on the end. Next I highlighted the edges of the blackened metal with a sharp brush and iron hand steel. You could lightly dry brush this step if you want to save time. I also added some scratches to the edges of the fuel can. I highlighted the dark bronze next with a few scratches of Runelord brass. Next I highlighted the light brass with a mix of about 3 parts Stormhost silver and 1 part Retributor armor. If you don't feel like mixing anything, you could use Liberator gold instead. Then I highlighted all of the steel areas with Stormhost silver. You could lightly dry brush this step if you want to save time. I added a few scratches here and there too. I used a sharp brush and added a few freehand patterns with black paint, thinned with water. And then I applied a decal on the banner. I finished the bases following my Ash Wasteland base video, which you can find in this link here. I'd like to give a big shout out to our supporters here on YouTube and Patreon. Thank you so much for your support. It really is a huge help. If you want to be like these amazing people and help support what I'm doing here, just click the join button down below or follow the Patreon link in the video description. Thank you. I think the color scheme matches the other models I've painted so far. I can spot some differences, but overall I think they're close enough and they shouldn't have a problem mixing in with the rest of the army. Are you a fan of the old style opaque base coat followed by a shade? Or are you a contrast all the way kind of painter? Or do you use both? Drop a comment below and share your painting process. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy painting!